latter part of the 20th century, the two predominant global powers were engaged in a prolonged standoff without direct military conflict for nearly 45 years. Let us examine the sequence of events that defined the Cold War. Context: the conclusion of World War II, the major European nations were significantly weakened, having suffered over 60 million casualties during 6 years of warfare. The two remaining superpowers were the United States of America and the USSR, who had collaborated as allies to defeat Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. The USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, encompasses a vast territory that constitutes 1/6 of the Earth's land area. It operates as a federal state under a communist regime, comprising 15 republics and governed by a single political party. In contrast, the United States of America is a liberal democracy, founded on capitalist principles. It possesses a military advantage as the sole nation with nuclear capabilities and is recognized for having the world's most robust industry and economy. The Iron Curtain superpowers sought to extend their influence across Europe. The United States, through its Marshall Plan, provided significant financial assistance to European nations to stimulate economic recovery and foster trade relationships. Conversely, the USSR aimed to secure its borders and establish pro-Soviet regimes in the countries it had liberated. Consequently, Europe became divided into two distinct blocs, separated by what came to be known as the Iron Curtain. In Germany, the Allied forces consolidated the territories under their control, contravening previously established agreements with the Soviets. In retaliation, the Soviet Union enacted a blockade of West Berlin, which remained under Allied administration. An airlift was subsequently organized to deliver essential supplies to the besieged area. Divisions from this point forward. Both powers are plagued by mutual apprehension. A campaign of persecution begins on both sides. In the United States, federal employees who express sympathy for communist ideologies are dismissed from their positions. Hollywood is also co-opted to generate anti-communist propaganda. In the Soviet Union, any dissent is ruthlessly quashed. Beyond their ideological differences and spheres of influence, the two powers compete for dominance in various sectors, including science, industry, space, sports, and military capabilities. The Soviet Union makes substantial investments in its industrial and military sectors, successfully testing its first atomic bomb in 1949. In the same year, the United States establishes NATO, a military alliance comprising nations from the Western Bloc. Influence wars during the Cold War. Numerous indirect confrontations occur between the two powers and their respective allies. The initial conflict arises in Greece, where a communist militia, remnants of the Second World War and backed by the Soviets and armed by Yugoslavia, engages in a civil war against the traditional monarchist faction, which receives support and funding from Britain and subsequently the United States. However, due to escalating tensions, the USSR severs its alliance with Yugoslavia. Consequently, Greek communists lose crucial backing and are compelled to surrender. Greece ultimately aligns itself with the Western Bloc. Wars in ASEAN China. Following 3 years of civil conflict, the communists emerge victorious over the nationalists, who subsequently retreat to Taiwan. This victory provides the USSR with a significant ally in the region, influencing two notable conflicts. The first conflict involves the communist North Korea engaging in combat against South Korea, which is backed by an international force led by the United States under the auspices of the United Nations. After 3 years of hostilities, a ceasefire results in the division of the Korean peninsula. Additionally, China intervenes in French Indochina, offering support to a communist rebel militia opposing France. After enduring challenges in its efforts to reclaim its former colony, France is compelled to withdraw from the region. Consequently, Vietnam is partitioned at the 17th parallel, with communists in the north and nationalists in the south, who receive support from the United States. This situation heralds the onset of the Vietnam War. The Suez Canal. In reaction to NATO, the USSR establishes its own military alliance through the Warsaw Pact. The subsequent year, France and Britain collaborate with Israel in a surprise military campaign against Egypt to regain control of the Suez Canal. Both the United States and the USSR oppose this military action and swiftly enforce a ceasefire, signaling the decline of European dominance in the region in favor of the USSR. The Soviet Union, having advanced in military and industrial technology, deploys hundreds of long-range missiles aimed at Western Europe. In retaliation, the United States positions its missiles towards Soviet territories in various regions around the globe. China has severed its alliance with the USSR following a series of disagreements as it seeks to establish itself as a formidable world power. Concurrently, numerous nations have opted to break away from the two dominant blocs, choosing instead to adopt a neutral stance by forming the non-aligned movement. In Latin America, the United States actively works to eliminate any potential for communism's spread. However, it fails in its military efforts to overthrow the newly established communist regime in Cuba. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the USSR capitalizes on the American setback to enhance its diplomatic ties with Cuba. Soviet troops and naval vessels are dispatched to the island, where missiles are deployed aimed directly at the United States. Tensions escalate to a critical level, prompting both sides' naval forces to prepare for confrontation. The global community watches anxiously, with many nations bracing for the possibility of World War III. Ultimately, through diplomatic negotiations, the USSR consents to withdraw its military assets in exchange for a US commitment not to attack Cuba and the removal of American missiles stationed in Europe, leading to a de-escalation of the crisis. In Vietnam, the United States, apprehensive about a potential communist takeover in the south, initiates a military invasion involving over 500,000 troops. This action strains relations with France, which advocates for a peaceful resolution. Consequently, France chooses to distance itself from the increasingly aggressive stance of the United States and withdraws from NATO. By 1975, the Communists emerged victorious in the war, delivering a significant defeat to the United States and damaging its global reputation. Soviet ascendancy, USSR, seized the opportunity to re-establish its political clout on the global stage. On one front, it provided support to communist militias in Africa, which were seizing control in newly independent nations. Concurrently, the Soviet Union deployed its military to Afghanistan to bolster the communist regime against the Mujahideen, an Islamist faction that received backing and funding from various sources, including the United States. Additionally, the USSR modernized and replaced its missile arsenal, aimed at Europe with more accurate systems. This development initiated the Euromissile crisis, posing a significant threat to Europe and prompting the United States to deploy its own new missiles. Consequently, an arms race ensued, with the USSR allocating as much as 14% of its gross national product to military expenditures. The decline of the USSR's, the Soviet Union faced financial difficulties. It struggled to sustain its economic stability. In the midst of this crisis, attempts to implement economic reforms proved ineffective. Eventually, the two superpowers convened to initiate disarmament discussions. The USSR withdrew its forces from Afghanistan and ceased its financial support for communist militias in Africa. In a bid to embrace reforms and enhance transparency, the Soviet leadership found it was too late to suppress the numerous uprisings. The Berlin Wall fell, leading to the reunification of Germany. By 1991, the USSR disintegrated, resulting in the independence of the 15 republics and signaling the conclusion of the Cold War.